We're going to make it clear right from the start that we won't be spoiling any of the story in Final Fantasy XV in this review. We're also going to kick things off by recommending that, if you're thinking of playing this, you do a little bit of homework first. As with most of the Final Fantasy games, 15 has nothing at all to do with any of its predecessors, so no prior knowledge of the earlier games are necessary. So instead, you should start with the excellent Final Fantasy Kingsglaive, which not only does a sterling job of setting up the world of Eos in which you're going to spend tens of hours, but also is a thoroughly entertaining film in its own right. Then, if you're thirsty for more, there's the prequel anime Brotherhood, which is, well, not excellent, but certainly not bad either. This will add some texture to the backstory of the game's protagonist and his band of unusual NPC compadres. Oddly, less crucial are the sort of demos that Square Enix has released over the last year or so, specifically episodes Dusky and the Platinum demo, both of which are almost entirely unrepresentative of the final game. You play as Prince Noctis, the slack and slightly disinterested son of King Regis. Regis's kingdom, Lucis, is under threat from the evil Niflheim, despite the royal family's ability to channel magic to protect their subjects and attack their would-be oppressors. After the events of Kingsglaive, which are specifically tied into the plot of the game via a patched-in cutscene, you take control of Noctis as he's embarking upon the world's weirdest road trip, with a car full of characters who look less like a royal entourage and more like a crap goth band who keep writing songs about self-harm and suicide. But don't let this put you off. Noctis and his gang are in fact nowhere near as awful as they first appear, particularly if you took the time to watch Brotherhood. Joining Noctis is his school buddy Prompto, the former fat git who's now the wacky and slightly gobby best mate with a penchant for taking photos, Gladiolus, Noctis' royal bodyguard and trainer who's far sterner than his botanic name would suggest, and Ignis, Noctis' advisor and professional nag. Noctis, as the son of Regis, has access to his family's magic, and this is mostly manifested in the combat. If you played the Platinum demo, you'll know that the combat has now distanced itself fully from the turn-based and pseudo-turn-based combat systems of before, and has instead aligned itself more with Kingdom Hearts.
This means that combat takes place in real time, and initially leaves you holding onto an attack button to have Noctis automatically taking care of business. As the game progresses, you gain access to an increasingly impressive set of moves, weapons and summons, which can be activated and combined with jumps and dodges, and reaches its pinnacle with the use of an incredibly fun blink move, whereby you can make Noctis teleport to wherever you choose to throw his sword.
As you build up AP, or experience points, you can start building up Noctis' entourage, either focusing on one or spreading out the upgrades amongst the whole gang. This adds a welcome layer of strategy to proceedings, enabling you to turn Noctis' mates into more traditional specialists such as tanks and damage dealers. Although you can't directly control the gang, you can trigger their special moves on demand. You can also perform team-up moves, which essentially see Noctis and one of the gang briefly take over to lay down a more powerful hit. Losing control in this way during combat reminded us of earlier Final Fantasies, and it was nice to see little nods to the past such as this. All the while, the game is judging you on your combat performance, awarding extra XP for dealing with the enemies in particular ways, for example via stealth. The sum total of all of this is that what initially feels like a simplistic combat system eventually blossoms into a neatly tactical affair that rewards time spent in building your character's abilities and combining these with the real-time action moveset. Unfortunately, when coupled with a surprisingly pacey start to the game that eschews the usual tortuously long build-up seen in the genre, a light is shone on the flaws of the tutorial system, which often veers between being somewhat light to downright negligent in how it teaches or occasionally doesn't teach you to play. When this game releases, we imagine that there will be a great wealth of information that will become invaluable to those starting, although we'd have much preferred it to be more solidly incorporated into the gameplay. Speaking of the length, Final Fantasy XV is a vast game and will undoubtedly reward anyone looking to settle in for the long haul. Square Enix has opted to construct a massive open world for you to play across, which should easily satisfy anyone annoyed by the linearity of past entries, particularly 13. As you would expect, the world has been filled with a cornucopia of side activities to lose yourself in, but, as you would also probably expect, not all of them are great. From ticking the Japanese RPG cliches of a fishing simulator and Prompto's photography side quest, to Ignis' predilection for baking, and a reasonably solid pinball game. There is so much to do in this game that Ubisoft is in danger of losing its crown as the king of side quest filler. That probably sounds overly negative. There is still plenty of wheat amongst the chaff, and a great deal of the side content has clearly had a great deal of care and attention lavished upon it. If you do take the time to push through these, they'll make the game world feel that bit more engaging and fleshed out, and of course will help you to build up XP more quickly. That said, if you're dead set on powering through the story, you're not as beholden to the side missions as in, say, Mad Max, but really that seems to epitomise Final Fantasy as a whole. You have a lot of choice in how to play, and the game doesn't go out of its way to punish you if you don't get caught up in every detail.
The driving in itself is not quite as enjoyable as it could have been, with much of it feeling a little like No Man's Sky in terms of how much it keeps you on a short leash, particularly during an earlier portion of the game, and as much as we enjoyed busting out the photos taken with Prompto's camera, we could have done without the enforced rest stops. Seriously, Square Enix, you don't have to replicate every facet of life to make a definitive RPG.
Coming next, sitting on the toilet simulator with watery diarrhea DLC. Whether you have the stamina to make it to the end of the game will depend largely on just how much you want to see the conclusion. If you're wondering if the story here ever reaches the lofty heights of Final Fantasy VII, then wonder no more. It doesn't. Although this has more to do with the fact that it's far harder to do something truly original in terms of storytelling now than it was 20 years ago. The narrative is, to a certain extent, all over the place, although this is probably more attributable to the nature of designing games of this style and magnitude. This makes it easier to forgive the vaguely pointless multiple dialogue choices that invariably make virtually no difference to what follows, and the tonal shifts, which are frequent, will most likely barely be noticed by our fellow anime fans. The same is true of the voice acting, which, unlike the splendid orchestral soundtrack, is okay rather than outstanding. The fact is, we ended up liking Noctis and his male harem far more than we expected to, and, well, the same is true of the game as a whole, really. Final Fantasy has made some pretty significant missteps in its history, but 15 strikes us as the Metal Gear Solid 5 of the series. It has a well-designed open-world map that's a pleasure to be in. Familiar but increasingly ageing design choices of the past have been overhauled in favour of a far more modern and enjoyable control system, and what you're left with is a game that skillfully serves newcomers to the series as much as it does veterans. That's not to say it's as outstanding a game as Metal Gear 5 though. There's just too much here that feels included for the sake of inclusion, rather than because it serves the game in any real way. And as much as we enjoyed the story to a point, it did feel as though it was trying a little too hard to defy expectations later on. Let's just say that the ending will provoke discussion. Its ambition also somewhat overreaches the technical capacity of its host hardware. While there were nowhere near as many technical issues as there were with the demos, there was still a considerable amount of graphical pop-up and noticeable slowdowns in terms of the frame rate. We tested the game on the base PS4, but we've heard that similar issues exist on the PS4 Pro, despite extra options allowing you to choose between the improved textures or a generally higher frame rate. Nevertheless, we're happy to recommend this to newbies or veterans of the series alike. If you're looking for a meaty game to keep you satisfied until Christmas, Final Fantasy XV ticks almost every box. As such, it gets a score of 85%.